Welcome to Things You Don't Know. In this podcast, we will unravel the forgotten tales of regions that nearly became U.S. states, but ultimately didn't. You know, when we were doing this, we were thinking about it, and we said, before getting into that issue, we want and need to set the stage by focusing on places that did become states or whose statehoods took a different form than what they had intended. It is our opinion that explaining this will make it easier to understand why so many territories remain territories today instead of becoming states.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Weaver, for bringing that to my attention. It makes the rest of our tale a little more understandable. Today, we're joined by my good friend, Dr. Jacob Carter. I'm very excited to delve into these lesser-known stories with you. Let's start with one of the most intriguing examples, the Republic of Texas. Dr. Carter, can you shed some light on why Texas didn't immediately join the United States after gaining their independence from Mexico?
Thank you for having me. The topic is near and dear to my heart. Getting back to Texas, after winning independence from Mexico, with significant assistance from the USA, in 1836, Texas sought annexation by the United States. However, the issue was contentious due to concerns over the expansion of slavery. Texas remained an independent republic for nearly a decade before finally joining the Union in 1845, sparking tensions that ultimately led to the Mexican-American War. Another notable case is the Kingdom of Hawaii. What prevented Hawaii from becoming a United States state earlier? Hawaii's situation was complex. While there was interest in annexation by the United States, it faced opposition from native Hawaiians who feared losing their sovereignty. Additionally, American sugar planters exerted significant influence on the islands, leading to political instability. Hawaii eventually became a United States territory in 1898, following the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy.
You know, it's really incredible to think how different the map of the United States could have looked. Let's take the case of Oklahoma, for example. Some Native Americans actually wanted a sovereign nation on U.S. soil. Others wanted a state remaining within the Union that would be governed by Native American principles. Finally, a third group wanted a white-dominated state. To understand that a little better, we've consulted with and are joined today by Dr. June Miles, who can offer some special insight concerning Oklahoma.
Thank you for including me in this podcast. The original name was the state of Sequoyah, a proposed Native American state in what is now Oklahoma. In the early 20th century, Native American tribes in the Indian Territory sought to form their own state to preserve their sovereignty. While Sequoyah's bid for statehood gained support, it ultimately faltered due to political opposition and the eventual creation of the state of Oklahoma in 1907.
That really is a story that deserves more attention. It was clear the presence of gold and silver, and later on one of the first great oil booms in the early 20th century within the territory affected the strong desire to maintain that territory as part of the United States rather than letting it be an independent and extremely wealthy territory. Many leaders in the Native American community believed that Sequoyah could serve as a refuge for Native Americans throughout the USA, similar to the way Liberia had been in Africa for freed slaves. Some prejudiced white politicians feared the rise of what Senator Charles Glass of Virginia called a unified Indian nation on American soil. Future Vice President Charles Curtis, Vice President under the Hoover administration, himself of Kaw descent, made a political bargain that worked out pretty well. He traded his support for Oklahoma statehood for immediate and equitable settlement of Native American land claims. Most families were allotted a minimum of 20 acres. You might want to check out my podcast on my experience last summer at the Hoover Institute. It was a great, very enlightening, and a lot of fun.
So I just had a question here. When you talk about Sequoyah and Oklahoma, can you kind of clarify what both of those were?
Well, Sequoyah had been a main region in what had been called Indian Territory, which will later on become the state of Oklahoma.
Oh, okay. Okay.
There are many other factors that influence these regions' paths to statehood. Politics, economics, and social dynamics all played significant roles. In some cases, issues such as slavery, cultural identity, and geopolitical considerations shaped the fate of these regions. Additionally, the process of statehood was often fraught with negotiations, compromises, and power struggles that reflected the complexities of American expansionism.
You know, these stories remind us that the United States is a diverse tapestry of cultures, peoples, and territories, each with its own unique journey. By exploring the complexities of these possible states, we gain a deeper understanding of the forces that have shaped our nation and the ongoing quest for justice, equality, and self-determination.
That's expressed a lot in the story of our next territory that did not become a state. It was called Franklin, and it almost became a state in the 1780s. After the American Revolution, the residents of what's now eastern Tennessee tried to form their own state. They felt neglected by North Carolina, which technically governed the region at that time, and wanted to name their new state after great patriot Benjamin Franklin, who I must say, in typical bluntness, made it very clear he hated the idea. If you want an analysis of Franklin's contribution to history, you might want to look at our podcasts about his inventions and his involvement in the creation of our nation. People of Eastern Tennessee petitioned the Congress to become the 14th state, but they didn't get enough votes. That's why it didn't happen. Eventually, North Carolina reasserted its control, and the state of Franklin faded into history.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff there. It shows how fluid and uncertain the early United States was, and perhaps even still is in some ways. Now, imagine if Franklin had become a state.
It's a key plot point in the alternate history novel, The Two Georges, but there are many like that. Our next area is called Deseret. This is one of my favorite almost states because of its unique size and cultural and religious significance.
Wasn't that kind of related to the Mormons somehow, as I recall?
It was. After the assassination of their founding prophet, Joseph Smith, and many persecutions, the Mormons were led by Brigham Young, and they migrated to what's now Utah in the mid-1800s. They proposed a state of Deseret, which would have been huge and encompassing much of the modern-day Southwest. But the federal government was wary of giving so much land to a single religious group, especially one with many controversial doctrines. They were practicing polygamy at that time, had very friendly relations with Native American groups that were not seen as pro-American. So that was very controversial. Instead, they created the Utah Territory, which was much smaller.
And even that led to conflicts, right? The federal government and the Mormons had quite a few clashes before Utah became a state in 1896. It It makes you wonder how the United States might look differently today if Deseret had been accepted. More territory, a different balance of power in the West. Absolutely. So let's shift gears to a more recent example. The state of Jefferson. I've heard of it. It was a movement in Northern California and Southern Oregon, I think. The state of Jefferson had been proposed multiple times, most notably in the 1940s and again in the last few decades. Residents in these rural areas often feel neglected by their state governments in Sacramento and Salem.
So what stopped them from becoming a state? Well, creating a new state requires approval from both the state legislature and Congress, which is a huge hurdle. Plus, there are economic and political challenges. For example, a new state would need a sustainable economy and infrastructure. And let's not forget the political implications. Adding a new state could shift the balance of power in Congress, which makes it a contentious issue.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a powerful movement. Unfortunately, their proposal was overshadowed by the push to create the state of Oklahoma, which combined Indian Territory with Oklahoma Territory. The idea of a separate Native American state, as we've already discussed, was rejected. It's a poignant reminder of the struggles Native Americans faced and continue to face in maintaining their sovereignty and cultural diversity and identity. It highlights the complexity and diversity of the United States history. These almost states, to coin a phrase, show how the map of the United States could have been very different. It's a reminder of the dynamic and often contentious process of state making. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see new movement for statehood emerge and succeed. History is always constantly in the making. One of the ongoing movements currently is to make the District of Columbia a state. They have tried several different times, several different ways. And, it's interesting how controversial it is at times.
I think it would be good for the country. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. One of my favorite topics we're going to discuss now is throughout American history, we've had a unique relationship with our neighbor to the north, Canada, since it was founded in many ways by French settlers and pro-American loyalists. And during the Revolution, a man called Moses Hazen, I hope to do a podcast on, created the Congress's Own Regiment, which is a group of pro-American Canadian soldiers on our side. And throughout history, different parts of Canada have sometimes sought to amalgamate with the United States. The closest that came to happened in the mid-20th century, and it concerned Newfoundland. Although Newfoundland is a very valuable part of Canada today, it was its own nation for many years. Venerable Canadian historian Conrad Black was quoted calling it the ultimate company town. This is a weird government idea, my friends. Its national government consisted of representatives of the Toronto Dominion Bank, the main financial power in the area, SO Canada, the gasoline company we call Exxon, and the Catholic and Anglican bishops. That's a corporatist idea. Listen to our fascism and podcast, understand more about corporatism. But this quasi-corporatist country in the 1940s thought about joining the United States. I've asked my dear friend, Dr. June Miles, to explain the circumstances of why these people took a different road. Dr. Miles, can you give us the background?
Let's set the stage. It's the late 1940s, and Newfoundland is at a crossroads. Newfoundland was a dominion of the British Empire but faced severe economic hardships after World War II. The people of Newfoundland were considering their future, and there were three main options. Join Canada, maintain a status as a British dominion, or, most intriguingly, become a state of the USA. This third option is what we're focusing on today. Newfoundland had strong economic and cultural ties to the United States. Many Newfoundlanders had worked in the U.S. during the war, and there was a significant American military presence on the island.
But why would Newfoundlanders consider joining the United States over Canada or remaining a British dominion?
Good question, Dr. Weaver. The U.S. offered significant economic benefits, including financial aid and investment, which were appealing given Newfoundland's dire economic situation. There was also the allure of American prosperity and modernity.
It's a very interesting question. Geopolitically, the United States saw great value in having Newfoundland as a state due to its trade opportunities and its strategic location in the North Atlantic. It would have provided a crucial military and economic foothold during the early years of the Cold War. The movement did gain some traction. There were discussions, petitions, and even some support from American politicians and newspaper tycoons. But despite this, the movement ultimately failed. Why? Was it purely a political decision? Partially, yes. The British government and many Newfoundlanders preferred union with Canada, seeing it as a more natural and stable option. Canada, on its part, was eager to incorporate Newfoundland to solidify its own geopolitical position and to prevent American military and cultural influence from growing in the region.
The 1948 referendums in Newfoundland were crucial. In the first referendum, no clear majority was reached. The second referendum offered a choice between joining Canada and returning to Dominion status. Joining the U.S. was not an official option in that referendum, the second one. The result was close, but a majority chose to join Canada. There were also cultural factors. Many Newfoundlanders felt a stronger kinship with the Canadians and the British Commonwealth than with the United States. The cultural and political identity of Newfoundland was more aligned with its northern neighbors. I guess I should say more aligned with their northern neighbors. Economic arguments were very significant during this whole process, but there were fears about losing cultural identity and autonomy if they joined the United States. The promise of financial aid from the U.S. was enticing, but it just wasn't enough to overcome these deeper concerns. It's also worth noting that the U.S. itself wasn't fully committed to the idea. While there was interest, there wasn't enough political will in Washington to push the matter through aggressively, especially given the complex international implications. So in the end, the movement for Newfoundland to become a U.S. state fizzled out. Instead, in 1949, Newfoundland became the 10th province of Canada.
I've always been intrigued of what might have happened if Newfoundland had joined the United States. It's a very intriguing what if. Economically, Newfoundland might have benefited from an immediate American investment, but culturally and politically it would have been a dramatic shift. The North Atlantic dynamics during the Cold War could have been significantly different too. And let's not forget the impact on Canada. Losing Newfoundland to the US would have changed the country's development and might have interfered with its close relationship with the United States.
It's kind of fascinating to me, too, because one of the things that I see the United States doing in many instances is taking a very strange kind of position, saying that American culture, American way of life, and all of that sort of thing is the epitome of life and living, and everyone should enjoy that. And that's a dangerous thing, I think, because indeed, every different culture has something to offer to the world. Don't you agree, Dr. Dean?
Absolutely. There's an African saying that I think sums it up. The best most people want for us is to be allowed to sit at their table using their china and their silver. And if we can learn to use it like they do, it will kindly allow us to stay. We wish to wipe the whole table clean. It is our own table, and we will sit in it, not as a privilege, but as a right.
Indeed. History is full of these crossroads. The story of Newfoundland reminds us how decisions made decades ago continue to shape our world today. Moving towards more modern times, the USA has many territories, over 50, I guess maybe almost 60 or so, including Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and the Northern Mariana Islands. But why does the U.S. have so many territories? Let's start with just a bit of history here. The story begins with the concept of manifest destiny. You probably all remember that from middle school history courses. That was in the 19th century. This was the belief that the United States was destined to expand across the North American continent. And this expansionistic mindset did not stop at the continental borders.
Exactly. As the U.S. acquired more land, territories were established as a way to manage and govern these new areas. Some territories eventually became states, while others remained territories due to various geopolitical, economic, and strategic reasons.
So why didn't all territories become states? There are several reasons. Some territories were acquired specifically for their strategic military importance. For instance, Guam and Puerto Rico were acquired after the Spanish-American War in 1898. These locations provided critical naval bases and military outposts.
Guam, for example, is strategically located in the Pacific, serving as a crucial military base for the U.S. It allows the U.S. to project power and maintain a presence in Asia and the Pacific region.
Another reason is economic. Some territories, like the U.S. Virgin Islands, were acquired for their economic potential. The U.S. purchased the Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917 to improve its strategic position and economic interests in the Caribbean.
But why do you think these territories were not fully integrated into the U.S.'s states? Political and cultural factors play a significant role. Integrating a territory as a state requires a consensus among its residents and the federal government. Many territories have distinct cultural identities and political structures that differ from those of the mainland.
For instance, Puerto Rico has a unique cultural and linguistic identity. While there have been several referendums on statehood, the results have consistently been quite mixed, reflecting the complex views of Puerto Ricans about their political future. Additionally, some territories prefer the status quo because it allows them to maintain a degree of autonomy while still receiving benefits from the U.S., such as federal funding and defense.
I wonder, are there any downsides for the people living in these territories?
Yes, there are significant challenges. Residents of U.S. territories are U.S. citizens except for American Samoa, where they are U.S. nationals. However, they cannot vote in presidential elections and have limited representation in Congress. This lack of full political representation is a contentious issue.
Economic development can also be a challenge. Territories often rely heavily on federal assistance and have limited economic opportunities compared to the mainland. This can lead to issues like higher poverty rates and limited infrastructure development. Despite these challenges, many residents of U.S. territories take pride in their unique status and cultural heritage. There's a strong sense of identity and community within each territory. So, what's the future for these territories? Will any of them become states?
It's hard to say. The future status of U.S. territories depends on many factors, including political will, the preferences of the residents, and geopolitical considerations. For example, Puerto Rico continues to have active discussions about statehood and independence or maintaining its current status. Similarly, the other territories may seek changes in their status based on their evolving economic, political, and cultural needs. It's a dynamic situation that requires ongoing dialogue and negotiation.
Ultimately, my friends, the story of United States territories is a testimony to the nation's complex history and the diverse identities that make up the United States. There are, in fact, 60 possible areas which could have been but did not become states. We're going to explore more of them in other podcasts. For those of you with a literary bent, Professor Michael Trinklin has a wonderful book called Lost States that explores a great many of these what-ifs of statehood. If you listen to my podcast on Robert Smalls, the great former slave and civil rights leader, he tries to get the Dominican Republic and Haiti to become states in the 19th century. This is a reminder that the United States is more than just the 50 states on the flag we often think of. There's a whole world out there of American territories with their own unique stories, preferences, and challenges.
Well, that's all for today's episode.
It was a great experience being on this podcast. Thank you, Dr. Weaver and Dr. Deneen. I am looking forward to our next collaboration.
I enjoyed this discussion very much. I hope we can explore more intriguing topics soon.
Thanks for joining us as we explored the reasons behind some of these stories in U.S. territories. If you got anything out of it, while you're thinking about it, like right now, give us a like, subscribe so that you'll be made aware of other podcasts. We're really not going to get into other stuff with you. We're not going to bombard you with things. But we really do want to know who's listening, and if you have comments, please make them. I've really enjoyed some of the comments that were made on some recent podcasts, especially one of them that's near and dear to my heart, which was a story about John Mosby. And I was corrected by somebody saying, hey, it did get somewhat in the North because I was born in Pennsylvania and that show was on TV there too, which I thought, okay, that's great. I like getting the extra knowledge. But anyhow, thanks for joining, and we'll catch you later.
Thank you, everybody, and my specific thanks to Dr. Carter and Dr. Miles as well. We're looking forward to a great many more interesting topics. So long, everybody.